Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Brian has been hogging the bell, but I think it's time for him to transfer power over. Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone here to today's keynote speech for the 2018 Soc Dems National Conference. And I'd like to say hello to everyone who's watching from home. I just want to say, right, I'm really excited. The energy that was in the room last night and the number of people participating today is fantastic. And going from, sitting around Roisin's table when we were talking about the party and whether we'd set it up to seeing where we are now is brilliant. And it's really energizing and incredibly satisfying. Walking in to the doors last night and seeing lots of new faces and old faces and people who share the same values and ideals as you, it felt like a homecoming, really. So it's very exciting to be part of this big team. We had a discussion last night on the locked out generation, which was led by Gary Gannon. And one of the points Gary made during that discussion was about how the Soc Dems are really about compassion-led policies. And I really couldn't agree with you more, Gary. It really resonated very, very strongly with me, because that's what the Soc Dems are. We are about compassion. But I think the other thing is, Irish people are about compassion. We are a very compassionate country. We are very community-driven. And it's something that really is integral to our culture. And I feel at the moment that the current government and the large parties are completely out of step with our values and our need for compassion to be shown. If you look at where the real leadership is coming from at the moment, it's grassroots organisations like Home Sweet Home and My Name Is. Because not one Irish person that I've spoken to thinks it's okay that we have 3,500 homeless children. And not one Irish person that I've spoken to thinks it's okay that elderly people are dying on trolleys in hospital wards or hospital corridors. So the Irish people want a governance system that is compassionate. And I think there's a responsibility on the Social Democrats to get our message out there that we are that alternative, we are that viable governance system that can provide them with that compassionate society that they're looking for. I think one of the ways we need to do that is we need to look outside of Ireland. Because some people, they're not aware what the Social Democrats are. They don't know what our values are and what our principles are. And if we show them other countries where the social democracy actually underpins really strong economies and very successful communities, we need to point to those countries and say it has been very successful in Europe and it can be very successful here. So I'm really pleased today to be able to welcome Philip O'Connor to come and give his keynote speech. Philip is a journalist who lives in Sweden with his 2 children and partner, and he is a political commentator also. And Philip has lived in a social democratic country, and he's going to tell us about his experiences. I think the things that we can take from that and what we can apply to Ireland, because it may not necessarily, we won't be able to take everything and apply it across the line. But I'm very looking forward to this, Philip, so welcome.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you. I'd like to open by saying that when Jennifer received the bell there, the seamless transfer of power from a man to a woman is one of the things that makes me proudest to be here today, ladies and gentlemen. Go to Dún Laoghaire. To be asked to address the first gathering of this conference last year was a privilege of a lifetime for somebody like me. And to be asked to return a second time is an honour that is hard to put into words. We'll see if I can manage to be invited back a third time now next year. I've been asked to speak to you here this morning because for the guts of 20 years, I've lived in Scandinavia, most of that time in Stockholm and Sweden, though I've worked pretty much all over the place. I've experienced up close what it's like to live in that society, to have children there, to be looked after by it, and to contribute to it. In 1965 in Sweden, after 20 years of a booming post-war economy, the Swedes had a homeless crisis or a housing crisis very similar to that which we have in Ireland at the moment, one that was caused by a lack of supply. Brimming with possibilities, the cities there twinkled like beacons to the people who lived out in the country, inviting them in. They offered opportunity and prosperity to all, drawing people from all over the place like moths to a flame, but the housing was in short supply. And it wasn't just for Swedes. In the post-war period, people came from Finland to fill the factory floors, and from Greece and from Hungary and the Balkans too, to fulfill the promise. They had nowhere to live. By then, the Social Democrats in Sweden had been in power since 1932, and they'd created a welfare state that was fast becoming the envy of the rest of the world. Their answer to that housing crisis was bold and ambitious and rooted in the social democratic values. In a country of 8 million people, they decided to build 1 million homes in 10 years. And they did it, plus another 6,000 for good measure. It was another example of that comprehensive welfare state, capable of acting decisively in a time of need, in what the former Prime Minister Tage Erlander used to call the strong society. In the mid-50s there, public health insurance was introduced for the first time, and the state took a greater role in what happened with the pensions of workers there. The money from those pensions was invested in building those million homes. And with that prosperity came even more opportunity. The opportunity to break down some of the structures that in the past had stood in the way of equality. Maternity leave was gradually introduced, and later paternity leave. Women were encouraged to return to the workforce, and men to take more responsibility in the home. And the barriers to doing so were removed for both genders. Olof Palme became a household name, not just because of these policies, but because of the way he stood up to America's actions in Vietnam at the time. Children were put at the center of society. In 1979, it became illegal to smack your children, and that was considered a little bit late by many, because corporal punishment in schools was outlawed in 1958. I'm sure there's one or two members here today who remember what a school in 1958 in Ireland was like. I was left-handed at the time, it wasn't the crack. These are just a few of the examples, ladies and gentlemen, of how social democracy has been employed in Sweden to make society better. I have benefited enormously from that. The little university education I have was received as a mature student in Sweden, and I could not have afforded it at home. I spent 10 months on paternity leave with my 2 daughters, and I've been laughed at by other men, some of them Irish, for not taking more. I've seen my 2 girls, who are now 13 and 11, growing into confident, capable young women, helped by generous health and education systems designed for their needs, again, with the children at the centre of the society. I've seen how these societies soften the blow of illness or unemployment by creating this social safety net that catches those who fall. But I'm not naive about it. I know that despite the best efforts of many, there is still enormous inequality of opportunity in Scandinavia. My work as a journalist has put me at the centre of riots caused by a failure to integrate young people. Young people who are grateful to have a new country to grow up in, but who feel the frustration of being barred from taking a full part in society because of where their parents came from. I sat with Afghan refugees, teenage boys who've never even lived in Afghanistan, as they awaited deportation to Kabul. All because Sweden's stated aim of becoming a humanitarian superpower has been quietly swept under the carpet to appease the far right in Scandinavia. In short, I've seen the enormous good on one hand that can be done when the principles of social democracy are applied, but I've also seen the darkness that inevitably fills the void when they are abandoned, diluted, or ignored. I am luckier than many who have had to leave our shores. Stockholm is only a few hours away by plane, and I get to spend pretty much every second Christmas here with my children and their grandparents on the north side of Dublin. This year we were in the city, nearly a decade on from the enormous financial crisis that hit this country. And as I walked up and down Grafton Street with my family on Christmas Eve, the shop windows told a story of a country in recovery. But the doorways of the streets surrounding Grafton Street told a different story. Here was our housing crisis writ large, our failure as a society in plain sight. People in sleeping bags with a thin bit of cardboard to keep the cold out of their bones. Dozens of them. It doesn't have to be this way. And believe it or not, we in Ireland have done this before. When Sweden built those million homes in a decade, the inspiration was not taken from Scandinavia. In fact, the first large-scale building of social housing to deal with such a crisis happened right here in Ireland at the tail end of the British Empire. The model used at the turn of the 19th century to begin to deal with the issue of the tenements was originally called charity rents. It went on to become known as social housing before it was expanded to mainland Britain and beyond, ending up in what was known in Sweden as the Million Programme. Many times I've spoken in the past about the effect and the influence that Scandinavia's social democracies have had on the rest of the world. But here, all of a sudden, was a social democratic idea that was hatched and took root here in Ireland before being exported. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when it became clear to me. My own commitment to these ideals and principles that have brought me here today and have brought us all together in this room were formed long before I left for Sweden in 1999, long before I visited Helsinki or Oslo or Copenhagen. Those beliefs were formed right here in Ireland. And that is the good news for the party activists out knocking on doors who are here with us today. The Irish people are often and popularly painted as being conservative, but in our hearts, many of us are already true social democrats. Most of us just haven't realized it yet, but that shouldn't surprise us. Our natural history is different to that of many European countries. The lack of major industrial centres means that we never had an organised labour movement like those places in which social democracy took root in the post-war era. So without being organised on the factory floor, how do these values manifest themselves in Irish society? Well, virtually every one of us in this room has a family member or a friend that we can turn to in our hour of need. In the absence of the state safety net to catch us, we've been forced to catch each other. What would this housing crisis look like if parents didn't take their adult children back into their homes when their rents get too high to be paid? What would it look like if friends didn't give up their spare rooms and their sofas for days and weeks and months on end? What would the trolley crisis in our hospitals look like if carers didn't take the mammoth task of looking after their loved ones at home day after day, with little respite and equally little help from our state? What would our childcare system look like if the grannies and granddads downed tools and said to their children, you have to find them a place in a creche? Irish people have already built a shadow social democracy in that we are already providing many of the supports and services that are taken for granted in other countries. But here, we do it informally. We do it invisibly. We do it without a fuss and with neither support nor gratitude from the state. There will be still some who don't believe me. But look, probably our most successful organisation in this country is the Gaelic Athletic Association. It's an organisation and a culture that surrounded me and enveloped me from my earliest years. And indeed, we started a club in Stockholm that I wrote a book about just to showcase the values. In fact, when Anne-Marie invited me here to speak, I was a little bit reluctant to come over, but then I discovered the Dubs were playing in Croke Park tonight. But much as it pains me to say it, ladies and gentlemen, the GAA is not just about the Dubs. The GAA is the thousands of mentors taking teams out every week for the sheer joy of it. It's the players, the boys and girls, the men and women pulling on the shirt to represent their communities. It's the flask of tea shared on the side of the road on the way to Croke Park on a summer Sunday. It is the rallying around in times of illness and death to support those affected. What is that, ladies and gentlemen, if not social democracy in action? We talk about defining and building a better Ireland, and from the perspective of this infant party, it seems like a daunting task. But in truth, much of the work is already done. The Irish people already share many of your values. Now it is just a case of reaching out to them. And how do you do that? Unlike other nations like Sweden and Finland and Norway, we've never had a government of the left here, and social partnership has been deemed to be a failure by many in other ways. We've never had a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, as the discussion prior to this one will have illustrated. At best, we've had like-minded career politicians playing musical chairs in Kildare Street. At worst, it's been a kleptocracy. Social Democrats need to say clearly and unequivocally that there is another way, a better way, a fairer way. Irish people are tired of this endless cycle of boom and bust, of being a country where the historically dominant ideology says that the solution to everything, from healthcare to housing, is the free market. History tells us that the market is not the solution. It is very often a large part of the problem. Irish people recognise that our economy must be competitive in order to be attractive. But we no longer want to be the casino where the rest of the financial world spins the wheel, and no matter where it stops, we are the losers. The Irish people, for me, are ready and willing to build a better country. Many are ready to wake up from their disappointed democratic slumber and to abandon the politics of the past. And the best way to rouse them is to knock loudly on their doors and to show them what we all have in common, a desire for a better, fairer Ireland. For all the talk of Facebook and of fake news, of algorithms and social media, elections are still won and lost in the canteen, in the dressing room, and around the dinner table. Much as it took me almost 20 years in Scandinavia to realise that I was a social democrat, a similar thing happened with my journalism. I'd been writing for a long time before I actually studied media and communication science, and there was one theory I came across that I always found fascinating. And that theory holds that the media cannot tell us what to think, only what to think about. It is together with our friends and our families and our peers that we shape our outlook and in turn our society. This would explain the dissonance between much of what we see in the media, where journalism has gone from being a working class trade to a middle class profession, staffed only by those who can afford to do interminable internships. It's why our media is surprised when there's such great support for marriage equality, or for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, or the magnificent work done by the Citizens' Assembly. It is why they can report on the Taoiseach's recent comments about moving abroad or back in with our parents in order to save the deposit for a house, without asking the question, what if your parents can't afford their own home? What if they are among the many who live in hotels or temporary accommodations? And can we never be adults ourselves? Representatives of this party have been superb in both the media and in the Dáil chamber. But the most effective way to reach people is through meeting them in person and face to face. Show them how much we have in common and reveal to them that regardless of how they voted before, there's most likely a large slice of social democracy in their outlook. There is a great story of the success of social democracy to be told, and at the risk of talking myself out of another speaking engagement this time next year, it is not the story of Sweden or Denmark or of Finland. It is the story of Ireland, and of how our people have banded together, despite our leaders and not because of them, to deliver the only aspects of our society that really work, those based on compassion, on kinship, and a shared sense of responsibility. This party represents the best opportunity to transfer that enormous goodwill, to transform that tremendous will and power into a political force in Dún Laoghaire. But be warned, my friends, that the path is fraught with danger. And the greatest threats to social democracy do not come from within, or do not come from without, should I say, but from within. Greatest among them is the selfishness that has affected Irish parliamentary politics almost since the dawn of the state. Do not make the same mistakes that other parties have made and that they continue to make. Never allow the party or its individuals to become more important than the principles it was founded upon. These must be steadfast, a rock-solid foundation on which everything a social democrat does and stands for is built upon. At times, there will be a temptation to abandon these principles for short-term political gains, as so many parties have done in the past. We've all watched as smaller parties in Ireland have gone to the polls on promises of protection for what they call the most vulnerable, only to betray them and abandon them for 30 pieces of silver and a grubby bit of power. But it is not just the small parties here that do this, and it is not only in Ireland. Over the last dozen or so years, I've seen many social democrats in Scandinavia abandon their principles, especially when it comes to racism, to appeal to disaffected voters who've been wooed by the populism of the far right. Only recently, the Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven was asked if he would deploy the army on the streets of places like those where I live to deal with criminal gangs. And he said it wouldn't be my first option. That he didn't immediately rule that out was an attempt to appease the far right. In Ireland, we are lucky that we don't face similar challenges from the far right just yet, but it's more good fortune than circumstance. The dominant right wing in Ireland does a good enough job of spouting casual racism, so as yet there is little room for the far right here. It'd almost remind you of that Stephen Sondheim song, "Send in the clowns, don't bother, they're here." Even if they have no support, they cannot be ignored. In the wake of Anders Behring Breivik's murderous rampage in Oslo and Utøya, Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, a social democrat, promised more democracy. Instead, his party was replaced in government by a coalition including racists that espoused many of Breivik's beliefs. There are many lessons to be learned from history, ladies and gentlemen, but the future is ours to decide. If we are to build a better Ireland, an Ireland that our children so richly deserve, it must be based on the immutable principles of social democracy. It must be better than what we have been offered until now. It must be a country where fairness is ingrained into every decision that is made. It must be a country where the government exists to serve the people, all of the people, and not the other way round. And every day we get up, everyone involved in that process must look at themselves in the mirror and say, what can I do today to make life better for my fellow citizens, for my brothers and sisters? To quote a great American writer, it is time to stop accepting that things cannot be changed and to change things that are no longer acceptable. Together, better and fairer. Go to Mina Mahagad.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think it's obvious that Philip has really spoken to the hearts of all of us here because, I mean, that was an amazing speech. And I think it also brings us back to the fact that we do have it here in Ireland, and it's just harnessing it and making it work for the country and making it visible. And I never thought I'd say this, but I'm really pleased Dublin are playing tonight. And I think we should rearrange the conference. So it's now in August, September. Yeah? Okay. So what I'm going to do now is we have a super SOCDEM panel here. I'm going to go to the floor because I know some of you might have a few points you'd like to make. If we'll keep them brief, and then we'll go to the panel, and we'll hear the panel will have 2 minutes each to give their spiel, except Gary, who got
who got Friday.
No time. Yeah, exactly. He might go on a bit longer, but
why is it going longer?
And then we'll go back for a discussion. Okay. So does anyone have any comments? Geez, you're all very quiet this morning. Can we get a microphone over here, please? So if you give your name and your branch.
Nobody wants to talk after you now.
Hi, Ronan O'Callaghan, Fingal. I wanted to ask Philip in regards to what he thought of the more recent success of the likes of the Swedish Democrats and the True Finns, and if there's a failing in the national social democratic parties to confront or not take a particular rhetoric and to confront their agenda or policies.
Absolutely. I find it quite frightening because I've been looking at this for, as I say, about 12 years ago when I started to get involved in this. Did I just turn off my microphone? No, still on. What has happened I think it was first in Norway and then in Denmark and now in Sweden, was that this slide to the far right has happened because you have these populist parties, and it's actually a sort of a cyclical thing in Sweden. In the mid-90s, there was a racist murderer called the Laser Man, John Ausonius, who went around shooting people of colour. He shot my friend's father. He was the last victim. And then about 10 or 12 years after that, there was Peter Mangs, who went around shooting people of colour in Malmö. He's now in prison as well. So this tends to be cyclical. And what tends to happen is that these people are inspired by the rhetoric of these populist far-right racist parties. And what annoys me, and what the point I was trying to make here today, is that you cannot dilute your principles as a social democrat or as an anti-racist and say, okay, I'm going to talk tough on crime and try to win these people back. Absolutely not. You have to stand firm and say, this is not a racist party. We are not a racist people. We're not going to appeal to this lowest common denominator that is brought out. It's a very, very simplistic thing to do with populist politics, has very, very little to do with facts. And you present these things to people, without any sort of packaging whatsoever. There's no cause and effect in there whatsoever. But my point would be not that social democrats should slide to the right, as they have done in Norway, as they have done in Finland, as they have done in Sweden, but instead hold the position and say, this is what we stand for. If you don't like it, that's fine. But these things are not up for negotiation. The rights of other people, the dignity of other people is something that I will never be prepared to negotiate on.
Would anyone else have a hand over here? Sean?
Brendan Palmer, Cork South Central. Unfortunately, I have to start by fundamentally disagreeing with you, Philip. The biggest game this evening is Cork versus Kilkenny and Páirc Uí Chaoimh. So, but on the kind of national side of things, I find the biggest problem is with politics in Ireland, there's so much style and so little substance. We can see with Leo's communications unit, just kind of enforces that even more. I live very close to the biggest Rebuilding Ireland project in Cork, 65 houses, earmarked, 15.9 million kind of funding seemingly available for it. Work started over a year ago. They cleared the site, they put up the bollards around it, they painted them, it looks lovely, and nothing has happened. A year and 2 months, nothing has happened. It's just a cleared site, a few cabins, no materials in sight, no bricks laid, and the only thing you ever hear is the announcement of the project. And Leo is a good speaker, Simon Coveney, very good public speaker, Minister Murphy, very good public speakers, and that's all we ever get to, that top level. There doesn't seem to be any kind of investigation of what happens after that release, what happens after that publication of the great plans. Because like one of the motions that Cork South Central has later on is to address the immediate problems of the housing crisis, because the long-term solutions just aren't happening under the guise of the current plans. Like I think the statistics for 2017 with respect to completed bills are just appalling. So I suppose more a comment on the question that so much of our daily politics is filled with the presentation, the glossy procedures, but very little substance behind it, and so frustrating. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, just a comment on that. The way the Irish political discourse works compared to, say, Scandinavia or Germany, that kind of thing, it's a lot different in that we have a very fast news cycle here, and that something could be news, basically for the duration of Liveline, and then it could be over, or on Vincent Browne, as it used to be, or on TV3 Tonight. And we need to be much better at taking that and saying, okay, what actually happened there? And that's why I'm so inspired when I see the two TDs from this party speaking in the Dáil, relentlessly pursuing the promises that have been made and either broken or not yet fulfilled. And that's the thing that we have to do. We have to become more media literate, we have to become more politically literate to really follow these things up, because so many things get said and yet nothing gets done.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move to the panel now, and I don't think they need any introduction. We have Gary Gannon, Niall O'Toole, Tara Deasy and Sarah Jane Henley from Limerick. So guys, I think, Tara, if I go to you first, and if you can give us a couple of minutes of your thoughts on.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. That's a really tough act to follow, Philip, and you're like, oh, God. Anyway, we'll get on with it. There's a couple of, I suppose, themes and things that have really struck me over the last day and today, and talking to people outside and outside session and that kind of stuff. But there's three kind of main things that stick in my head. Academics talk a lot that we're in a careless society. And I'd have to actually disagree with that. I actually think we have a careless government, but we actually have a very caring society. And I think our people, and a lot of those are sitting around here, are probably the most caring people that we have, and we're very lucky to have them in our party and in our presence. But we do have a government, essentially, that actually ignores the vulnerability of its citizens. And another word I want to bring to the mix is the individualisation of our problems. If you're homeless, it's your problem. If you're unemployed, it's your problem. If you're a lone parent, it's your problem. If you actually can't get on the waiting list to get your heart transplant or whatever other medical, it's actually your problem as well. Now, I don't want to bore people with stats because it's like, oh, snore, and especially when you've heard Philip and then you have to listen to this. But I just have 4 stats that I think are very relevant, and I think especially for us as a party, they're vital. 63% of lone parents are living in deprivation in 2015. Some of them are here, and some of them have worked on a lot of reports around the implication of that. That's doubled since 2008. 33% of students, and some of you are here, are at risk of living in poverty. Carers grants were cut by 20%. Youth work was cut by 30%. Community groups have been cut by 70%. So essentially what we've been dealing with is a careless government that have brought around policies that actually make it impossible for people to engage and participate. But yet we're told it's your problem and it's your fault. I'm really proud to be in a party that actually listens to people. And it's a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. And the last term I want to discuss and mention it very briefly because it's been touched upon, but I really think, and I feel very strongly about it, is the whole idea of community development. And I really fundamentally believe if we're going to bring about change, if we're going to bring about a better society, we really have to start from the bottom up. Community development was a real buzzword 10 or 15 years ago when I first started working in the area of drug policy and social inclusion. Nowadays, it's nearly like a bad word. We're doing community development, but don't tell the funders, because if you tell the funders, they'll cut our funding because we're meant to be doing something else. So people are doing community development in a way that is still helping communities, but they aren't specifically being funded to do it. I believe that our policies and our values are going to protect and empower people. I'm lucky, and I often use this phrase, I'm lucky and I'm unlucky to sit on a lot of committees. I'm not going to actually name them, but their understanding of community development is very different to mine. I sat at a committee on Friday morning just before we came here, and it's a county-wide committee, and it has a lot of senior people from TUSLA and the HSE and that kind of stuff. And they talked for about 20 minutes about what we need to do. There was an area or a community where I work where there'd be a huge increase in suicide. And they talked amongst themselves for a good 15 or 20 minutes, senior psychologists, and we need to do this, and senior social workers, and how about if we sit down and talk about this? And I just asked the question, as a matter of interest, has anybody actually talked to the community about what they feel they might want? And it was like, oh yeah, sure, we should probably do that, shouldn't we? And it's like, yeah. I sit on a community safety forum, and there's one of the councillors from obviously another party that was like a dog with a bone about let's organise a tidy towns, because sure, that's what it's all about. We'll tidy up the town and sure, it'll be great. Most of the residents can't leave their house because of crime and intimidation. Most of the residents are dealing with mushrooms going up through their shower. The damp being so bad that all of their children have respiratory issues. You can't push a buggy down the footpath because the footpath is so damaged that one of you is going to get injured. And I suppose they're the issues that we're dealing with, and Catherine dealt with it this morning when she talked about the reform of local government. That cut-off and that understanding of what we mean by community development isn't happening at local level the way it should be, because senior decision makers and the government are ensuring that it doesn't. I've been involved in the National Drug Strategy, and some of you are going to have to endure this conversation later on this afternoon. But the way that even consultation happened, a national drug strategy that's going to be around until 2025, we had a 6-week consultation, and one of that part of the consultation was a 20-minute meeting. And that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, around the individualisation of issues that unless we're actually really honest about it, and unless we look at all the other stuff, we're never going to make our society a better place. And I suppose in conclusion, one of the fundamental things and one of the attractions of the Social Democrats were the values around equality, democracy, sustainability. And they're the exact same values of community development. And I actually also think it's intriguing and it's very interesting, and it's great to see that so many people sitting here, sitting down there, are in one way or another involved in community development. And I think that's really at our core, and I think we need to hold on to it and run with it and do the best we can on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Tara. So if we go to Niall next, if you pass that, do you need the mic? Oh, yeah.
I think I'm mic'd up. So I think Ireland's a bit strange that we don't have a big social democratic party the way most other European and developed countries do. So if you look at pretty much every developed country, there's a big centre-left party, and they're the ones that make sure the public services get developed, that there's a bit of fairness and equality in society, and that they're also able to run the economy and balance the books. And so Ireland's strange that we don't have one of those parties, a big party that can lead government. And I think if you look at what we've started to build here, I think we can be that party. So I don't think we should be aiming to spend the rest of our political lives trying to convince Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael what the right thing to do is. I think we should be aiming to lead government and to be making what we want a reality and putting forward making our vision for Ireland a reality. So I really would urge everyone at conference to have that ambition for us as a party and to go out and make that happen. And when you look at those three things around fairness and equality, the public services and the economy, I think we've put in place good building blocks. So within our parliamentary work, we are the party that has made Sláinte Care happen. So for the first time, we have a cross-party plan for the health system, a fantastic achievement for a small party. I think if you look at the other major crisis, and there's a few crises going on, but if you look at the other major one around housing, we've just brought in our renters' rights bill. So two fantastic contributions from a small party to say we believe that the state should play a broad role in our public services and in improving society. I think the second thing we need to be very strong on is making sure that there's a floor that no one can go beyond or below, and that we to Tara's point, that we don't just say if you have a problem, it's your problem. That we are willing to work together to help each other. And it's going to be very important for us to espouse that view as a party. And then I think the third one, we need to be very strong on not just saying that social democracy is affordable, but actually it can be a great driver for our economy. If we're investing in our public services, it means that people don't need to pay for health insurance, that they're not bankrupted if they have a health problem, that the housing doesn't cost half of their income. That frees up a lot of money for people to spend in the economy. If we're supporting local businesses, we're creating good quality jobs. That can actually drive forward our economy. So we have to move away from this thing around saying, oh, well, we can't afford it. Actually, we can't afford not to do it. I think we need to move away from it. We need to have a very strong conversation about tax, not just about how high or how low the tax should be, but we need to change that conversation to what do we want to provide as a country? What services do we want to provide? What does that cost? How can we do it as efficiently as possible? We have to do it efficiently. If we believe that the state should play a broad role in society, we need to have a question about where we're doing things efficiently, and then we need to go and make it happen. So I think that's really important that we as a party are putting the building blocks in place around those three areas. And I think Philip and Tara and Jennifer are right that Ireland is there's a good chunk of us who believe in that social democratic vision for society, and we need to get out and show them that we are credible as a party and that we can make it happen. And I'd really urge all of you to get just for this year is going to be really important for us. So if we believe that we want to make this happen, if we want to have big ambition for the party, we need to get back to our constituencies, get behind candidates, get involved in our local communities and show people how we're living these values. And so I just urge all of you to get back and come back energized from this conference and let's make it happen.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anne. Now, I'm very conscious of the time. We only have 10 minutes left, and I obviously have two panelists, and I do want to get back to the floor. So, Sarah Jane, do you want to go next?
Yeah.
Microphone.
Oh no, I have.
Oh, you have a microphone, sorry.
Yeah. No, thanks a million. This has been great, Phil. You're brilliant. Has anyone asked you to run as a candidate for the party yet?
I don't think.
I was wondering.
I don't think there's a constituency in Stockholm, unfortunately.
Yeah,
You never know.
But I was in, if we could give you a good enough offer, you should come back. No, it's brilliant. I mean, I think in terms of looking at how other countries make policy, that's the way you should make policy. Look abroad, bring back best practice, evidence-based policies, learn from what they've done and the mistakes that they've made, apply to the country that we live in. Obviously, I think a good example is, the decriminalisation and all of that, and people compare us a lot to Portugal and things like that. We've got different, drug use and different demographics and things like that, so we can't apply it directly to ourselves, but it's definitely a way of doing policy. So I love hearing about that and what they're doing in the Nordic countries. I suppose just from a kind of a political perspective, I hear all the time on the doors, we're not going to have a new political party in this country, it's just not going to happen. But we're a really young state, realistically, we're just over 100 years old, and I think we need to give ourselves a bit of a break. We look at history and people say, if you don't look at history, you're doomed to repeat it. But in this instance, just because we haven't had a new party set up in this country doesn't mean it isn't possible for it to happen. And I agree with you totally. I think that a lot of people are actually social democrats, but they don't realise it and they haven't been given the message and hasn't been articulated well enough. But there was a study, I studied politics in college, and it always stuck out to me. It was by Lipset and Rockin, I can't remember their first names or whatever, but they were doing an analysis of party political politics across Europe. And, I was looking through it going, oh, this is interesting or whatever, no sign of Ireland. And I was like, they always forget Ireland, we are in Europe. But it was a kind of a footnote at the back, and it's a very peculiar case, built on civil war politics, no ideological parties within the state, doesn't look like there's going to be one for a while, kind of a thing. And I just thought, that's not the country I live in. And I think Peter Tannum said it last night really well. It's like we can all sense it, but realistically, it hasn't really emerged yet. Well, I'd argue that it has. We're in our second year of a national conference and we're doing quite well. But I suppose from, the Parliament's perspective, whilst the disparate Dáil and the balance of power between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael isn't the most ideal thing, it is a huge opportunity, I think, for us as a party to start pushing legislation through and look at the Renters' Rights Bill and things like that. That gives us an opportunity to have our voices heard and to get the messages out. And I think that message, that Renters' Rights Bill, as well as the other bills that the guys have formulated up in Leinster House, it got through because they were good, sensible policies. We got the message out, and the general public latched onto it. And as a result, as we all know, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, without naming names, which I just did anyway, they respond to public pressure. They respond to popularity of things, and generally speaking, it's not through evidence-based policy or best practice or ideology. It's through what people want, whether it's good or bad. So if we keep doing that, whether we have 2 TDs, no matter how amazing they are, or 20, we should continue to kind of keep using the public opinion, public perspective to put pressure on the larger parties that continue to govern us. But hopefully they won't be governing us for too long. We can continue to grow and all that kind of stuff. So that's it.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Sarah.
a million.
And I really think that people who say that there isn't room for another political party have not seen the people coming to our conferences and haven't seen the growth at grassroots level in our party. And I think the local elections or the general elections will be a real eye-opener for some people out there. Gary?
Thanks, and thanks, Phil. That was a really incredible speech. I'm listening to the conversation on stage. I spend a lot of my time surrounded by really great social democrats. When I think about the reason why I'm involved in this, and I think about the challenges facing us as a Republican in our society, what I'm always struck by, the ideology that I conform to social democracy, it's absolutely not revolutionary in any way, shape, nor form. The challenges that face us are not insurmountable. I remember our previous conversation, somebody talking about what social democracy is. And social democracy, for me, is basically the minimum that a citizen should expect in terms of their engagement with the state. And none of these concepts that we talk about, they're not unicorns, they're mythical creatures. We talk about a universal healthcare system. That actually exists. It exists in many places throughout the world. You talk about the challenges of our housing crisis at the moment, which is heartbreaking in so many ways. But this has continued on now probably for the last 7 years, but certainly in some form over the last 2 or 3 decades. We have actually confronted this in our own history very recently. I mean, we've built social housing, we've built mass social housing, and we can do it again. When I'm thinking about things like education system that is free and accessible, that you can know that you can send your child to school and you'll get a decent standard of education in a classroom where teacher to student ratios are quite small. that's actually very, very achievable. So I sit in this room today, and I sit on the stages with people like Tara and Noel, Sarah Jane, Jen, and Phil every once a year. But,
Hopefully more.
Hopefully more. But what I'm reminded of is the reason why I'm here and the reason why we're all here is I genuinely believe that the people on this stage, definitely, people spread out throughout this room, they would write better legislation and they would be better politicians than what exists currently. And if you do not believe that, maybe you're in the wrong room, but I don't think we are. I believe I'm fundamentally here because I believe, like Noel, like everyone else, that we have the capacity, we have the means, we have the assets already at our disposal to work towards being a leading party in government. Not some time off in the next 50, 60 years, but if we keep spreading our message, we keep knocking at doors, it's relatively simple when you break it down. There are the candidates around here that you think would make great legislators. If there are, believe in them, buy into them, knock at doors for them, drop some leaflets. I think the tone of this debate is about how you build a fair republic. It's believe in your own capacity to contribute to it. It's absolutely very simple. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Philip just has a quick comment to make, and then I'm going to go to the floor. Now, I've 3 minutes, I think.
I was just listening to what Gary said there, and I was struck by how my commitment and the development of my social democratic principles is a lot like the relationship I have with my wife. And she tells me fantastic things I go, not to tell. And then a year later, not only have I absorbed that, but I also have the ability to make it sound like it was my idea to begin with. And the point is, Gary, that's exactly it. Be out there, talk to people. It's going to be enormously frustrating in the beginning because, first of all, people will say, well, this is going to cost me. If somebody else gets something, it means that I have to give them something, or that I have to make a sacrifice for them. And that's not really the way it works. And that's where the conversation is at now. But the more you move on and you talk about these values, there is nobody who's against better schools. There's nobody who's against a functioning health system. There's nobody who's against eradicating homelessness. It's just how we get there that is up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Now, who can make their point as concise as possible? Put your hands up, because I'm going to take 3. There's 3 hands there I can see. Bernard, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Bernard Wicklow. One thing, we all have the points, we know what we want to do. Conversations I've had repeatedly, the answers I get, but we couldn't do this, we can't do this, we'll be crap at it, we can't afford it, and so on. I've had conversations about where this comes from. In a lot of ways I'm told, yeah, we were a colony for a long, long time, we're not in the habit of doing things. And I have to say, guys, get over yourselves.
Thanks very much, Bernard. With a hand here and a hand here, and then I think we'll have to finish up. Sorry, this
and Paul.
Lady here, and then.
Thanks very much. It's just a question for Philip. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm from Sweden, so it was great to hear. If I could get your thoughts on, I suppose, what in Sweden as well, unfortunately, has been happening, the kind of creeping worship of the market, not just, to go much more right, not just in terms of, racist ideology, unfortunately, but even in Sweden, the privatization of the pharmacies, the very odd school reform, this kind of idea that, the left got, that's so passé, so naive. How can you kind of move away from that and instead say, look, this is a valid, it's not something that was only working in the 50s and the 60s, it's a valid thing for today and for the future.
Okay. I think I'll just take the next,
sure, yeah.
and then we'll have to finish up. Yeah, just that hand there, yeah.
Hi, Padraig Lohan, Limerick County. I think when it comes to public services, the idea of, the idea of, free third-level education, or the idea of reforming the HSE, or the very idea of the HSE to begin with, we may not have had a social democratic party in Ireland before, but these aren't new ideas. So how can we sell social democracy, and how can we sell investment in public services and developing public services to an electorate who, whether they have or not, feel like they've heard this all before? That's...
If I can address the first point there about this lurch to the right that's happening, a lot of this has to do with Tony Blair and what they did with New Labour at the time. And they were trying to make something which is, as the gentleman just said there, it's something that's been around for a long time. And it's hard to keep repackaging things like this and make them sexy. You can always take a tax cut and make that appealing to people. But paying slightly more tax for childcare is something that it's very, very difficult to do. And the trap that Sweden's Social Democrats and the Norwegian Social Democrats and the Danish Social Democrats have slid into is trying to be this sort of all things to all voters kind of a thing. And this is why I made the point earlier on in the speech that no, your principles are your principles. It's not like the Marx Brothers where if you don't like them, I have some others. This is what it is. And you either buy into that or you don't. But that is why, politics is about drudgery and it's about compromise and it's about endless rounds of negotiation in order to get consensus. But that is what got Tage Erlander to where he was. That's what got Olof Palme to where he was. The school reform that this lady mentioned, Sweden is now the only place in the world where you can profit from the schooling of children, right? There are private schools there, the money follows the child. The system is absolutely crackers. I witness it every day. I deliberately live in an ethnically mixed area, right? Where parents from all over the world, they're taking their kids out and they're putting them in English schools because the English schools, their marketing thing is discipline. Oh, there's no mobile phones here, and they get sent home with notes and everything. The whole thing is chaos. And what happens then is that the so-called cream rises to the top. So the state schools are left with the children that nobody else wants, whose parents don't have the capacity to go and say they'll get a better education elsewhere. And this is absolutely destroying where I live. This is leading to enormous social problems. It's leading to kids dropping out of school, getting involved in drug dealing. Exactly what we experienced in Dublin in the 80s, Gary, is starting to happen now because of that single reform. And it also is elsewhere. And this is why I say that the dangers to social democracy are not from without, they are from within. And the moment you start to think that these principles are up for negotiation is the moment you get on that slippery slope. So not only will I say these words to you here today, but I'll go back to Sweden and I'll keep saying the same things that I've been for 20 years, that these are not just an option, these are the only principles for a fair society.
Thank you. I really wish we had another hour because I think we could have a really, really good discussion. But thank you very much to our panel, particularly thank you very much to Philip and to the GAA for that certificate.